So one of the things that I really enjoyed about last week is that we had some really good discussion, and that we can be challenged, right? We can be challenged by the Word of God. So one of the things that was encouraging for me is that I walked back, and it was actually this table that I heard some discussion of, just wrestling with the story of Cain and Abel. And I enjoy the wrestle, right? Because that tells me that we're seeking after God, we're seeking after deeper meanings and understanding, and honestly, that's the whole point of all of this, is just to provoke thought. Welcome. And so, as Brenda said earlier, we do things, as you can see, a little bit different here at Restoration Church. My husband and I, Josh, have a vision for some of what we're doing right now, is just to really equip God's people and give them good tools and dive deeper into the Word so that we can understand it, so that when we go out to this lost, dying world that needs drastic healing, that we have tools to be able to come alongside of them and be the light, right, and to be the salt into the earth. So we do things differently because we're smaller and we can, and we just really want to equip our people well. So last week we talked about why God created the earth. We are, for those of you at home and for new visitors, we are doing a Bible study called God the Creator by Randy Frazee. And last week we talked a little bit about why God created the earth and what he did in that, and talked a little bit about the story of Cain and Abel, because we have to understand our rebellion in all of this as well so that we can get correct. So before I get started on this week's lesson, is there any, did you have any personal time with the Lord this week where greater clarification or maybe some, thoughts came about from last week's lesson? Anyone? All right. Well, this week is called God Builds a Nation, and it's from Genesis 12 through 36. So on your tables is a Bible. If you don't have one, if you have one in your phone, if you brought your Bible, please maybe open that up, because he might reference it a few times in the video. Here is the welcome. Maybe you have heard the term nation building used in media news reports. The term generally refers to efforts in underdeveloped countries to rebuild after ravages of war or corrupt leadership. Among other things, the process involves forming a government, establishing an economic system, creating an infrastructure of basic services such as water and sanitation, setting up legal and justice system, and providing protection from outsiders. Needless to say, it is a daunting endeavor, where new challenges and unexpected problems spring up daily. In this session, we will see the way God chose to build his nation involves some of the same kinds of struggles. In fact, just to put his divine fingerprints on the process from day one, God chose to do it in ways that we would consider impossible. So the key verse for today is this. It comes from Genesis 17:7, and it says, "I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and to be God of your descendants after you." The key idea today is going to be God's first step in providing the way back into relationship with him is to build a new nation. God establishes this nation on the most unqualified couple, Abraham and Sarah, who are old and childless. God chooses this pattern to show that he is behind the writing of his grand story of redemption.
Maurice, age 87, was very contented living in the Alpha nursing home just outside of Stubington, Hampshire, England. After meeting Edna, 76, he grew even happier and fell deeply in love. Only yesterday, Maurice plucked up the courage, got down on his knees, and told her that there were two things that he would like to ask her. Edna smiled and replied, "All right." Maurice asked softly, "Will you marry me?" Delighted, Edna answered him, "Yes." Then she asked Maurice what his second question was. He replied, "Edna, will you please help me to get up?" I love that story. You know, age has a way of sneaking up on all of us eventually. Truthfully, I feel as good as I did when I was 25, but when I look in the mirror, it tells a different story. Getting older can leave you with the sense that your best of life is behind you. Maybe it's not age for you, but just the sense that you missed your chance at life to fulfill your dreams or to do something really meaningful. Well, if that's how you feel, session 2 is going to really be good news for you. You see, there's a noticeable pattern with God in the Bible where He picks the person to help Him with His plan to get us back, who in the lower story sees themselves as the least qualified person for the job. Now let me remind you, the lower story is how we see things from our perspective, and the upper story is how God sees things from His perspective. And throughout the Bible, we're going to see that God is going to take all of these lower stories and weave them together to tell His one grand upper story. Now, in session 1, God began to paint this beautiful mural. From the first stroke of the divine brush, He unveils His vision. He simply wants to come down into the lower story, which He created, and to be with us. But the first people, Adam and Eve, didn't embrace that vision, and as a result, they were escorted from the garden. A spiritual virus was born in Adam and Eve that created an option for evil and selfishness in our lives and our relationships with others. This kind of lifestyle has no place in the community of God. We also learned that this spiritual virus that the Bible simply calls sin is transmitted to all of Adam's offspring, and that means us. We found in the story of Noah that the plan to get us back into a relationship with God will not come from people, not even the best of us. So God begins to unveil His plan in session 2 to get us back. He's going to create a brand new nation. Why? Through this nation, set apart for His purposes, He will reveal His presence, His power, and His plan to get us back. People of all nations who watch this new nation will be able to discover and to see what God is up to. So the first order of business is to pick a couple to get this nation started. Who would you pick? A young, vibrant, good-looking, healthy, influential couple with a medically proven capacity to crank out a lot of children. That's how we think in the lower story. But God thinks differently in the upper story.
There once was a man named Abram, who was a descendant of Noah. God told him to move with his wife Sarai, an entire family away from where they lived. God made a promise: I will make you into a great nation and bless you, and all of the people on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram and his family left. At one point, they stopped and God told him to look around. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your children. Then, one night, God took Abram outside. Look up and count the stars. This is the number of children you will have. But Abram was already 75 years old, and Sarai was way too old to have children. So they decided that Sarai's servant Hagar should have Abram's child. Hagar became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Ishmael. Yet God told Abram again, you will be the father of many nations. God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah and promised that it would be through Sarah that God's blessing would come. Exactly as God promised, Sarah became pregnant, giving birth to a son named Isaac. When Isaac was still a young boy, God told Abraham to take his son up on a mountain and sacrifice him. Abraham took Isaac, laid him on an altar, and took out his knife to kill him. But an angel stopped Abraham, and God provided a ram to sacrifice in place of Isaac. Years later, Abraham and Sarah died and left everything they owned to Isaac. Isaac married and had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau was Isaac's favorite, and as the oldest, he was set to gain his father's inheritance. But Jacob wanted the inheritance, so he came up with a scheme to trick his father, who was now old and blind, into promising it to him. He dressed in Esau's clothes and put animal skin on his hands because Esau's hands were very hairy. Confused, Isaac gave his blessing to Jacob and promised him the inheritance instead of Esau. This caused a huge fight, one that almost ended in murder before they went their own ways. Thankfully, they reunited, and God promised to bless Jacob's family. Jacob had 12 sons of his own. And like his father and grandfather before him, Jacob had a favorite son. Little did Jacob know that his favoritism would put his son, Joseph, in danger of being killed by his own brothers.
God selects an old couple named Abram and Sarai. When God first taps them on the shoulder, Abram is 75 and Sarai is 65. They got their AARP card in hand, discounts at Denny's for the early seating, and collect Social Security checks monthly. In addition to their age, Sarai is barren. She can't have any children. Why does God pick them? He does this so that when people see this great nation, they will not see the strength of Abram and Sarai, but their weakness. They will see God as the one above the scenes of our life building this amazing nation. They will see His presence, His power, and His plan unfolding. At the opening of session 2, God invites Abram to go and leave the comforts of his homeland to a place that God would show him, and that He promised not only to give them children, but to make them into a great nation. Not only this, but this new nation would be one day a blessing to all the people on the earth. Abraham likely didn't comprehend everything completely, but God was saying to him, I'm going to use you and this new nation as my plan to provide a way for all people to come back into the garden. The Bible simply says, so Abram went. In Hebrews chapter 11, we are told, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, there is one thing I know about most senior citizens, being the proud possessor of my own AARP card. We don't like change. But this older couple dug deep, got way beyond their comfort zone, and believed in God. And this is their only claim to fame. The story doesn't unfold as smoothly as you would think. The first order of business is to start popping out kids, right? To have a nation, you have to have peoples, at least one. That's called logic to us lower story dwellers. Yet 10 years go by and still no children. Abram is now 85, Sarah 75. So Sarah gets this idea. She thinks, maybe God needs our help. That phrase almost always leads to disaster. She concocts a plan where Abram sleeps with her servant Hagar. Abram, as might be suspected, puts up no objections. They have a child and named him Ishmael. God comes to them and says, I will make Ishmael's offspring into a great nation, but this is not my plan. Ishmael is the father of the Arab nation and the foundation of Islam. What God promised has certainly come to pass. 13 more years go by and still no child. Abram is now 99 and Sarai is 89. God comes to them and changes their names. Abram's name, which ironically means father in Hebrew, is changed to Abraham, which means father of many. Ouch. Sarai's name means princess in Hebrew, is changed to Sarah, which means queen. Ouch. These are hard names to live up to. Finally, a year later, Sarah has a child who is named Isaac. Isaac's name means laughter, and you would laugh too if you had a child when you were 100 years old. But the story isn't over. When Isaac is around 15 years old, just about to get his camel's license, God comes to Abraham and asks him to do a crazy, completely crazy thing. Abraham is now 115, Sarah 105. Optimal years for raising a teenager. Here's how the story unfolds. God says, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. You know, I'm just the average Joe trying to get by in the lower story, but this seems completely insane. But Abraham obeys. We are told later in the story, or Hebrews chapter 11, that Abraham figured that God would raise Isaac from the dead. Now that, my friends, is faith. As Abraham was bringing the knife down to take the life of his son, an angel likely Jesus himself, told Abraham to stop, that God had provided a lamb whose horns were caught in the thicket. Abraham sacrifices the ram and takes his son home. Whew! Now that was close. Well, we are told that Isaac grows up and gets married to a gal named Rebekah. Listen to this. They are married 20 years before they have their first child. This nation-building thing is really getting off to a slow start. They have twins, Jacob and Esau, and we are told that Jacob has 12 children, so we finally got some momentum. You think you're too old? You think you have missed out on your chance to do something big, something significant? That's the way we think in the lower story. But if we align our lives to God and what He's up to, some of our best years are still ahead of us. One more thing you may have noticed. Embedded in this incredible story is a clue of what is to come. Listen again to what God said to Abraham. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you. Now compare this with John chapter 3, verse 16 of the New Testament. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. Do you see the parallel? Of course. This is the same phrase God the Father will use of the sacrifice of His only Son. But not only that, do you know where the hill of Moriah is? 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1 tells us that it is the place that will later become the city of Jerusalem. It is the same hill 2,080 years later that God's one and only Son, Jesus, will be offered up as a sacrifice on a cross. All the characters, all the stories you're going to experience are woven together artistically by God to tell the one very, very important story that promises to change your life forever. It makes you want to fall to your knees and give thanks to God. If you do, and you're a little older like me, you might want to make sure someone is around to help you get up.